Thank everyone for being here today and welcome to our third workshop of the semester. I love our Director's Corner. I think it's always great when we can get some FaceTime between the students and both Bob and Mike, who generously give their time. So I do have a couple of announcements I want to go through before we start tonight. And for Bob and Mike, before I forget, because I put a big note here, please stay on. Are we doing the picture at the end? Can you guys make sure you stay on for our picture? So we're gonna
Sure.
put walls surround the TV or something like that. Christy asked that we do that. So thank you very much. So for our traditional 395 students, keep in mind your outline and annotated bibliography is due November 5th at 5 p.m. You should have all gotten back comments from me on your research proposal. So that is coming up fairly quickly. The outline and annotated bibliography is a little more involved. It's not going to take just a couple hours. So you're going to want to start on that sooner than later. Also make sure that you get your 2 workshops in. Obviously, this is one of them. And for some of you, you may be completing that requirement. So we've done 3 already. We have 3 more to go. In fact, a week from today, we're having a workshop here with our fellows at 4 o'clock with Gloria Molina and Nicole Blackman. Nicole, you were giving me that look like I forgot something. No, you're good? Okay. Hard to tell with the mask. No, so just make sure you get those 2 workshops in, as well as get your second political event in. CPF is running events all the time, so you're going to want to grab one of those or another event that's on campus. So traditionally for our Director's Corner, I'll do brief introductions as I always do, but usually I moderate questions for about a half hour, 40 minutes, and then go to Q&A. But both Nicole and I, and this was probably more inspired by me, thought that we would turn it over to the students a little bit. Maybe I'll start with an opening question for both of you, but I really want to have you all a chance to be able to speak with 2 people who have long histories in politics. And there's so much going on now. It's kind of like shooting fish in a barrel, to be totally honest. But let me start with some introductions and I'll do an opening question, and then I'm literally going to turn it over to the students for the remainder of the time. So Bob Shrum, as you know, is a co-director of the Center for the Political Future, the Warshaw Chair for Practical Politics in the Department of Political Science and International Relations. He's been a political strategist and speechwriter for many, many politicians, including Senators George McGovern, Ed Kennedy. He worked on the Gore-Lieberman campaign, the Kerry Edwards campaign, has quite a long history involved in a lot of campaigns. Many of you might want to delve into some of that. And Mike Murphy, our co-director, has worked for over 200 Republican statewide campaigns, including Jeb Bush, Mitt Romney, Arnold Schwarzenegger, just to name a few. But to be honest, the one aspect I truly enjoy is his podcast, Hacks on Tap, which hopefully will continue on. He does that with David Axelrod, and it's a very good listen if you're interested in having that experience. So I thought maybe I would start simply by, as we do as teachers, give letter grades, and it's midterms now, so lots of letter grades going out. Bob, what letter grade are we going to give Joe Biden right now? And maybe what does he need to do to improve upon it?
Well, in terms of COVID and the vaccine rollout, I would give him an A. In terms of passing reconciliation and the bipartisan infrastructure bill, I'd have to give him an incomplete. I'd have to send one of those things to the dean saying, we just don't know what's happening with this person. Now, I've been in class for the last couple of hours, so I don't know what's happened, but it appears before I went to class that they're very close to having a deal with Manchin and presumably Sinema, who will only comment that her discussions with the president were very good. And my guess is that we will vote on the bipartisan infrastructure bill at the end of the month, and that by then they'll have an outline on reconciliation. I am a sufficient contrarian to think that in some respects, Manchin has actually done Democrats a favor, because some of the tax increases that were proposed in the Build Back Better plan I think would hurt Democrats in the midterm, especially in suburban districts. And I think a lot of those are going to be gone. So you'd have to give them an incomplete on that. On foreign policy, I'm sure Mike and I are going to disagree. There's just been a poll taken of countries around the world, and Biden has basically restored respect for America and American leadership in the world. I don't think there was a neat way to withdraw from Afghanistan. I saw Stanley McChrystal on television the other day, and he said, look, I didn't want to withdraw, but there was an agreement to withdraw, and you would have had to send a lot of troops in to not keep that agreement. And the truth is that wars you don't win, don't end neatly. So I don't know, probably a B+, an A- on foreign policy so far. But on the central issues that I think will decide the midterms, COVID, the economy, the investment in infrastructure, which will actually make a difference on the economy, and Build Back Better. If you put them all together, I'd say incomplete, and we might know more a month from now.
Mike, how about you? What are your grading thoughts?
Well, I'm a harder grader, I think. Coming from the conservative side of the spectrum, I think he was off to a solid start with how he, to the extent anybody can really control it when you have a country where we have to pay people to take a miracle drug, or threaten to, mandate it. I give him a C+, conceding the point that he has many more exams to take. We're not even through the first semester yet. My grading score would be, I'll do it more on the politics because we don't really have the results. I do disagree with Bob a bit on the Afghan evacuation. I think his handling of the European allies has been surprisingly clumsy, both the Australian submarine deal vis-a-vis our oldest ally, the French, and essentially mugging most of our European partners on the mechanics of the Afghan withdrawal. It was Trump level ineptness, which surprised me. On domestic policy, we don't know yet. I mean, as somebody, as a Republican conservative who was so anti-Trump, I voted for Biden. I am disappointed on domestic policy, how far to the left he has lurched. He has not been in the moderate corner. He ran as a moderate. So we'll see. But right now, I think the debate has kind of escaped him. He hasn't been a leader in it. He's been passive, which I understand why. He's in a tough situation with 90 House Democratic progressive members who aren't that interested in doing what he thinks or wants. But to me, he's looked like a bystander in the whole thing, and it's his agenda being fought over. So that is not strong politics. Now, the media is full of proclamations this week that they've decided they're going to land this multi-trillion-dollar spending bill. We will see. I think they still have coalition problems, and maybe Biden's going to get more involved in it, and might be able to turn his C+ into a B with some adroit politicking going forward. But I think he has stumbled both domestically and in foreign policy. Where he succeeded has been basic competence, which was a good contrast of Donald Trump on the COVID answer, and on kind of the day-to-day machinery of being president, not saying crazy things every day. But he's underperforming where I thought. His political polling numbers reflect that. They're dropping quickly. And I think the threat to the Democrats in the midterm elections to lose control of the House and possibly even lose the Senate, where they have more advantages, have declined over the last 6 months under his leadership. So on kind of political management of the presidency and some of the important things the president does, I'd give him a C+ with a footnote that he has a few exams left to hopefully improve his grade.
Right. Wow, great comments. All right, team, I'm going to turn it over to you. Who's got a question for our directors? Be bold, be brave. Yes, Billy.
Hi, professors. I'm Billy Burler. I'm a sophomore here. My question to you is about climate policy. So we saw that Senators Manchin and other centrists in the Senate kind of limited the amount of climate policy that President Biden is going to be able to get through in his two plans. I'm wondering, how do you think, regardless of what happens in the next few months going forward, how does Biden navigate introducing substantial climate policy with the big divisions within his own party?
Great
Would like to,
question.
yeah, who would like to jump on that?
Well, Bob, you want to start? I've got views on it.
Well, he's going to do a lot more by executive order. The problem with executive orders is they can be repealed by a subsequent president. He's going to get some stuff, for example, in the Build Back Better plan and in the infrastructure bill, where I think they're going to build a lot of, for example, electric charging stations across the nation. But to go back to Mike's point, when you have the kind of margins that he has in the Senate and the House, it's, basically every senator has a veto. Every Democratic senator has a veto, assuming you can't get a Republican. And the result of that is that the subsidies for clean power plants, for plants transitioning to clean power, are almost certainly not going to make it in to the Build Back Better plan, which I hate, by the way. I think it's one of the worst names for, why not say, and we're investing in Medicare, we're putting more into healthcare, we're providing childcare. Instead, somebody came up with an overall title, which combined with the, 3.5 trillion, 1.85 trillion, totally obscures what's in the bill. I would add one footnote here, and it's not just about climate, it's about everything. I think Biden is being underestimated, and this is where Mike and I would profoundly disagree. I think he's being treated very much the way he was treated in the run-up to the primaries, and when he was basically written off. In fact, I had a very good friend with whom I had a bet who said that he wouldn't make it to the Iowa caucuses. So I think a lot of that, and it's kind of a herd mentality in the press. So he's got a 39% approval rating today in the Quinnipiac poll, and that gets flacked out. And the 50% approval rating in the CNN poll and the CBS poll kind of gets ignored. One of those polls, some poll is an outlier there. But I also don't believe that he will be judged on what happens today. I think he will be judged on what's happening 6 months and 8 months from now. And if COVID's under control, if the economy is in good shape, if he's managed to pull off some of these legislative endeavors, I think that he will be in a very different place than the press asserts he is right now.
Well, on climate change politics are really, really difficult. And the reason is that at the kind of top level, they look really easy, which is everybody, the vast majority of Democratic voters, a majority of independent voters, and a substantial minority, but almost a majority of Republican voters all say, yep, we got to do something about climate change. So politicians like to come and say, I've got a great plan on climate change. The problem is if you put a bunch of really smart economists in the room, they're going to say, look, the biggest problem is that the CO2 generating energy sources are economically very attractive. So if you really want to do something, you've got to push people out of their comfort zone. Most Americans want to solve climate change without doing a lot of work. Maybe they're buy a Prius and they think, I've solved it, I'm a good person. It's kind of like, I want to win a triathlete contest, but I don't want to do any running or sweat. So it's such a real existential issue. You've got to change people's behavior. And my favorite example is electric cars. About 3 to 4% of the US consumers choose to buy electric vehicles. In Europe, it's up in the 20s. Now, what's the difference? Well, we pay people $7,000 of your tax money to buy an electric car, and they still won't buy them. In Europe, far more people buy them with the same $7,000 subsidy because gasoline is 3, 4, 5 times as expensive in the EU. So carbon taxes are the way to go. Now, Republicans go nuts because it's a tax. industrial unions don't like it because they worry it'll cut employment. They've all got good short-term reasons. But if you want to really move on climate change, you got to move the free market. And you do that by making carbon energy cost more, which forces industry then to move to other sources that are cleaner, nuclear, solar, geothermal. There's a mix depending on the application, which, you know, the power of the US economy is so much bigger than the power of government. But the Democrats know, okay, we're for a carbon tax. And to their credit, some are. The rest say, no, the Republicans will slaughter us. So instead, we'll get our Build Back Better plan. And I agree with Bob, it sounds like a chiropractor's office. And we're going to have green energy spending. All you got to do is vote Democratic. You don't have to do anything. And we're going to solve the problem. The problem is what that really means is subsidies for big power companies and other interests that may or may not entice some change in the amount of CO2 we emit. But they're not nearly as powerful as the free market things to make, frankly, dirty energy cost more. That's the quickest way to get rid of something, but it's so politically scary they won't do it. So now Coal State Manchin and silent but fiscal hawk Senator Sinema both don't like the idea of hundreds of billions of dollars being spent to hopefully nudge people by paying them to do the right thing. Just like they want to double the amount of money for the $7,000 you can get if you buy an electric car. The problem is Americans, they're not taking the bribe. Why? Because gas is cheap. You can buy your big pickup truck and, you know, off you go. So now they're stuck because they don't have the money for the optic thing, which is here's a lot of magic climate change. All we got to do is raid the treasury for a few $100 billion. The money is not there for that. Nobody has the guts in politics to start changing the energy market by changing the cost of the inputs. Though some Democrats are now really talking about carbon taxes, and I give them credit for their political courage. So
even Mitt Romney, by the way, even Mitt Romney is talking about a carbon tax.
Yeah, because anybody who understands the free market, which every honest Republican should, we're a little short of those, knows it's the real answer. Now, yes, money for research. How do you do coal sequestration so you don't try to turn off the whole coal industry and all their senators like Manchin overnight? You know, there's room for some money, but they're kind of stuck right now. And so what will happen is some optics, a few programs that make some sense, electric transmission lines, things you can marginally do, but there will not be big action. Instead, there will be politics with the Democrats saying the evil Republicans and Joe Manchin stopped us from our huge spend that frankly wouldn't have done much other than burn money. And the Republicans not even enough courage to be free market when it comes to fighting climate change. It's one of the fundamental failures right now of our political system to treat this thing like adults and understand the voters can't be asked to fight climate change. They have to be compelled to do it.
Yeah, it really becomes pocketbook politics at one point.
Yeah, I mean, is it worth having your uncle have to get another job that may pay less in the coal industry or heavy metal to know that his grandkids are not going to be wondering why there's a big wall around New York to keep the water out, or great grandkids? And voters like short term, where's my candy, rather than long term, I've got to take care of the generation 100 years from now. It's just human nature.
I think that's changing a little because of the forest fires, the fact that Miami Beach gets inundated on a fairly regular basis. And people are going to, by the way, start feeling this as a pocketbook issue because insurance companies are going to refuse to insure coastal properties, or else they're going to charge so much that you're going to be paying more for your insurance than you are for your mortgage. So those kinds of forces may help change the politics. For right now, I think I'd be a little more optimistic than Mike. I think you're going to get moderate action, somewhere in between, you know, what people who are really worried about climate change wanted. And I think Manchin's going to have to give a little bit, and will give a little bit on the climate change provisions, not the one on transitioning coal-fired power plants.
Yeah, makes sense. Who's got a question? Yeah, Chloe.
Hi, I'm Chloe. I kind of have a two-part question. So both of you have obviously worked extensively in politics and have seen an infinite amount of different politicians. In your own experience, how did you select candidates beyond the politics? Like, what did you see in candidates or people that made you want to work for them? And then my second part is, in our own careers and in our own endeavors, how can we embody those same successful traits that you saw?
Can I, if somebody, I'm sorry, we obviously cut the microphone budget yet again at USC because I couldn't quite hear the question. Art, can you repeat it a little to make sure I have
Sure,
an
we
answer
don't all
that's vaguely
know. Let me
related
pass-
to it?
Might just be easier if I just pass the mic. Oh, go ahead and grab one of those. Sorry.
There we go. Sorry about that, Chloe. But
No,
we can do it one more
sorry, I
time
didn't
first.
realize.
Can you hear me now?
Loud and
Yes.
clear.
Yes.
Much better.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. So both of you have a vast political experience, both in campaigning, just seeing a lot of candidates in politics in general. Beyond political kind of agendas, what did you see in candidates that made you want to work for them? Or like, what was that spark that you saw? And then my second kind of follow-up question is, in our own endeavors, in our own careers, how can we aspire to embody those traits and mirror that same success as you maybe saw in other people?
Well, with Bob, it was cash on hand. With me, it was character and vision.
That's a good
No, Bob, you want to go first? And I'll chime in.
Well,
Mine
I
is
was going
fairly
to say,
similar.
something like Mike. I said, first of all, they hired me, and that helped. But that isn't the reason that I did this. I did this. I lived the life, and I've been very lucky to earn a living doing what I love. First in politics, and now in the academic world. But I did what I did in politics because I had very strong feelings about the country, about where it should go. I'm part of a generation that was inspired by JFK and that thought you had to give something back and that you had to contribute whatever you could. And I would actually defend most of the people I worked for. The couple I didn't like in the end, but I'm not going to talk about that. And I don't mean personally dislike, I lost respect for them. But most of the people I worked for were sincerely trying to make a difference, were sincerely trying to contribute to society. And I think it's not worth it to go into politics, either into elected politics or into the kind of stuff that Mike and I did, unless you really have that kind of conviction, because you're going to take grief. I mean, I remember in 1986 or 85, when we were doing Jerry Belisle's campaign for governor of Virginia, and he won. The Washington Post had this screaming headline one day that my firm had just been paid $3.5 million, which was a huge amount of money in politics in those days. And you could read through the whole story. No one had called us, and there was no clarification of the fact that almost all of that money was designed to buy time on television. It wasn't money that we were going to keep. So as a candidate, you're going to get grief. Your life is going to be an open book. Increasingly, I think that's true of consultants. It was true of consultants when I was doing this. But then you have extraordinary moments and where you think that you've made a real difference. I mean, I felt that way, for example, to take a campaign outside the US when Ehud Barak defeated Benjamin Netanyahu for Prime Minister of Israel in 1999. And I was a strategist in that campaign. And in fact, I have a picture of just having received a phone call saying we'd won, and Ehud is sitting there and I'm standing, and we're both smiling ear to ear. Now, of course, that victory almost led to a peace agreement, but in the end it didn't. And he lost the next election. Whereas the other thing I'd say, you have to, if you're going to do this stuff in politics, you have to be prepared to know that every couple of years, your heart can get broken. Because if you really care about these issues, and if you really care about these folks, they're not all going to win. And anybody who tells you they won every race is lying. It's just not true. I think you gotta have a motivation that goes beyond making money. I mean, if it was just about making money, I did have someone come to me at one point in the 80s and say, look, I'm going to go off to New York and I'm going to work in investment banking, and I talk to them, and you could do that too. And I said, that's not what I want to do. I would have made a lot more money doing that, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. I'm not complaining about, by the way, how things worked out in life, or have worked out in life. The second part of your question, I think that there are so many different ways to get involved. You don't have to run for office. You can help someone run for office. You don't have to do this on a full-time basis. You can take time out and do it. But it is the lifeblood of democracy to have people willing to run, to have people willing to help them, to have people willing to contribute to them. And if you care about what your society is going to be like in 10, 15, 20 years, then you need to be involved. Mike and I are probably not going to disagree about much of this.
Yeah, I'd kind of break it into a few parts, but no, I do agree with what Bob said. It is, so when you first start out, it's a very competitive business, and it's rewarding to competitive people because you get to win or lose. And, you know, if you like competition, it can be a lot of fun. But when you're first starting out, you have high ideals. You're an activist for your side or the other. I'm going to go into practical politics to help my side win and stop those, you know, dangerous SOBs on the other side from ruining the country. It's all very clear. But you're like a young doctor. You want to operate. You want to get experience. So, hey, we got Jack the Ripper out here, and he's got a very, okay, I'll operate. Save his life. You know, I want the experience. Then if you're successful at it later, you start to find out that the human nature is human nature, and a lot of politicians can disappoint. It is a cynical place. So then you wake up and suddenly you're the guy in the, you know, because you've done this because you love politics and you care. You wind up, you're the guy at the circus cleaning up all the elephant shit at the end of every show. And somebody comes up and said, God, that's not a fun job. Why do you keep doing that? Why don't you quit and leave show business? Never. So, you know, and then you got a business and you're making money. So you start thinking commercially a lot because you got, you know, 15 mouths to feed in your little small business, and you find you're competitive about succeeding at that too. So for me, the test becomes when you have enough success and power that you don't only reflexively say, I'll do it. This guy may be a jerk, but he's better than the other party's jerk. And you get to a place where you can start saying no and not help people because you're just not trying to ring up the scoreboard. And so that I think is pretty important. Now, as far as decisions you make in life, you know, they're those to yours to decide, but compasses are not tough things if you're honest with yourself. Now, first of all, by the way, 4 hours ago, I was at Cedars-Sinai getting a horrible procedure that all of you will have to get when you're older. So I got off, they put me under, so I'm high right now. Okay, I'm half out of my mind. So don't make any.
Mike, how are we supposed to tell the difference between how you are now and how you are usually?
Well, I'm usually high, but I'm particularly high on the wonderful Michael Jackson drug they put me over. The screen is literally upside down right now. But I would just say you're kind of know it when you see it. I always had a soft spot for people running for office who I could admire as practical, and that means occasionally cynical politicians, but ones who were not cowards and on big votes that counted would put skin in the game and risk what most politicians hate, which is the possibility of losing. Because once they get elected, a lot of their focus turns to staying there, and they get tested all the time. And I've learned to have medium-low expectations, but I have been proud of many of the people I've chosen to work for and stayed with, that in those moments, they did the right thing. I'm very proud that I've represented some of the Republicans who had the courage to vote to impeach Donald Trump. I'll tell you a fast story. I did Mitt Romney's campaign for governor of Massachusetts. And once he got there, there was kind of a delegation from Beacon Hill, the state legislature, that came to see him with a message, Republicans and Democrats alone. And the message was the same that every new governor gets, which is, Governor, go cut some ribbons, lead a parade, fun job. But if you want to get anything done, we have all the power. We control the budget. So you're going to have to work with us. It's going to have to be back and forth. And Romney said, sure, I get that. And then they said, okay, well, as you know, one of the most powerful people in our Democratic Party is the retired president of the state Senate, William Bulger. Now, his brother is the infamous mob chieftain who's on the lam from the FBI. You made some noises about this in the campaign. And I'm telling you, lay off the Bulger stuff, or the brother who still pulls a lot of strings are going to shut you down and you'll have a dead governorship. There are about 8 of them in the room. And Romney looked around and said, I totally understand your point of view. But I'm going to, this retired super politician, the brother of the mobster, had a very well-paying state job running one of the universities. And Romney just brought in his chief of staff. So where everybody's clear, I've heard you all out. Now we're firing him tomorrow morning as president of the university if he won't cooperate with the FBI. And you can try to shut me down if you want. It was like an Elliot Ness thing. They couldn't believe it because they were used to the Boston model of get along, back scratch. And Romney was an absolute Boy Scout on that. He was called to do that again as one of the only people with the guts stand up to Donald Trump. So you pick the good ones and you never regret it later in life. And you find when you actually, if you're good at this, which is a long, hard path, you will have some political power all your own. And you'll get tested and you'll get to make hopefully the right decision. It will come in your career. And I encourage you to do the right thing, even if powerful. I used to have 25 people working for me in Washington, D.C., and I made a lot of money every year. Now I have 4 because our firm directly took on Donald Trump and 3/4 of our clients fired us. And my partner, Matt Leonardo, who runs it out there, he's never been happier. But, you know, he's making 1/3 of the money he used to. So know you get tested in politics down the road. And I encourage you to do the right thing. You'll sleep better.
Nice, great comments.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm Abraham, I'm a junior. So I've heard in a lot of my international relations courses and economics courses, how immigration is helping our demographic crisis. But I don't see it anywhere in political narratives of the Democratic Party. Why do you think it's missing? And do you think it would be useful if they said, populist Republicans are threatening your social security solvency and labor shortages?
I think it's too complicated an argument. I happen to agree with it. I happen to think it's absolutely right. One of the reasons Japan has such a sluggish economy and has had such a sluggish economy for more than a generation is because it doesn't have any immigration. The more immediate challenge right now that the parties are focused on, and in very different ways, is what do you do about the undocumented people who are already here? Not how do you bring more people in? I think that you would find among mainstream Republicans, to the extent that they still exist, I'm talking about Romney, Bush Republicans, McCain Republicans, would agree with what you just said. But I think Democrats are embroiled in a battle to try to do something about the dreamers and about the 11 or 12 million undocumented people who are here. Ronald Reagan always thought that those folks could be persuaded, at least a substantial number of them. And by the way, Bush did persuade a substantial number of them in 2004 to vote Republican, and was instrumental in working with Ted Kennedy and a Republican senator named Alan Simpson in passing amnesty in 1986 and creating a pathway to citizenship. Mike could talk more about this, but that's toxic in the Republican Party. I remember when, 2013, I think the Senate, the Gang of 8 or 9, whatever it was, managed to pass an immigration reform bill. McCain was part of it, but so was Marco Rubio. And he went from near the top of the polls for the Republican nomination in 2016 to the basement. And he suddenly had to decide that to be a viable candidate, he had to oppose his own bill. So that's where all the attention is centered. And you've touched on something that I think is a problem in our politics, which is explaining a 3-step argument. immigrants are good. They're not going to take away American jobs. We don't have enough people to fill those jobs. They'll pay taxes. That will help shore up the Social Security system. Compare the complication of saying something like that with Trump in 2016 saying, look, I got a simple explanation for why your communities are being hollowed out and your jobs are being lost. And that simple explanation is immigrants are taking them away and foreign trade is destroying it. So he took some principles of the Republican Party and actually turned them on their head. And he won those Rust Belt states and thereby won the presidency. So I think it's a very complicated argument in a way, too complicated for a lot of political discourse, and that attention is focused on a more immediate question, which is what do we do about the people who are already here?
Yeah, part of politics is picking the fight. You're absolutely right. Economically, it's indefensible to be against immigration. It's vital for the country. Both what most voters think when they hear of immigration, which is, oh my God, people are sneaking in here to cheat and steal, all of which is ridiculous, and take menial jobs. But frankly, the economy needs that, agriculture, other jobs that most people sitting in front of the TV yelling at it about this would never take themselves, and the high-tech jobs. The United States is a factory to help allies and sometimes rivals compete, because our excellent university system, which you are in the middle of participating in, is extremely good at bringing bright kids from abroad in, if they can pay, to get incredibly good advanced degrees in the sciences, engineering, and then go back to their home country and develop very valuable IP and then beat us competing. It is insane. Anybody, any foreign-born person who can pass a quick background check, who's got an advanced degree, ought to be offered automatic citizenship here. And frankly, a ton of them would like to live here. It's still the best place. So the problem, as Bob said, is the politics of it, where we have a long history in this country of a certain stupid nativism in both parties. So currently it's stronger in the Republican Party, but there are sectors of the Democratic Party where it rages, which is people who are different from us are scary and therefore we don't want them here, put up a wall. The good news is the history of the American experience is the opposite. None of my relatives got here because they got a handwritten invitation. A couple of them broke in. Others of them got off the boat and were handled a rifle and said, congratulations, you're in the Union Army, head south, start shooting. So, I think as a country building immigration, I still remain optimistic, but we're in kind of a dumb spot right now. And as Bob says, it's hard to win campaigns with three-tiered argument. That said, the elites who have a lot of power in the country, they just don't participate in the populist kind of silliness of the campaign, get this, which is why I think DACA is going to get done. And I think some H-1B visa reform is going to get done. It's funny, I'm living this right now. I'm trying to hire a very smart young kid who's a Mexican citizen to work in my agency from Mexico City, where they're at a client of mine. And I called up an immigration lawyer and said, professional degree, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, well, wire me $4,000 and I'll start on the paperwork, get ready to wait. It's just unbelievable. I am a long-term optimist, but a short-term pessimist. The victories are going to be small in the short term, but I still think it'll move in the right direction, particularly with DACA.
Great. Next question. There you go.
Me?
Yeah, sure.
And I'll do this.
Yeah.
Hi there, this is Aura.
Hi.
I'd like to return to the first subject that was the current situation in Washington at the moment. What I see as the Democrats' weakness is that they are never as unified as the Republicans. There's always constant infighting and it's extremely public. And the president, for that reason, projects a lack of control because you're fighting against your own party and they're trolling you and your senators. So that's the setup. And the question is two parts. People say, Biden's a master of the Congress. He understands the negotiations. He will get this done. But does that Congress, that Senate that Biden was in, exist anymore? Because you have a number of very vocal people. They might be a minority in the sense that they don't have a lot of votes, but they have a lot of power and they're the loudest voice. And they're absolutists. They say ideologically we have to be pure and they want to fight against everything if it's not 100% of what they want. So how does anything get done in those situations? Who's running the show? Is that the new Washington, the loudest voice, the absolutists are controlling it? Or are they lacking courage? What's the reality right now?
Let me answer that in a month. Let me give you my preliminary answer now. You're right, it's not the same Senate that Joe Biden was in. It's become a very different place. You can't imagine a conservative Republican senator from Utah partnering with someone like Ted Kennedy to ensure children's health care for 8 million kids and getting renominated, let alone reelected. So it's a much more polarized environment. So Biden has to do it on most issues only with Democrats. I think this is where self-interest comes into play, although I'll put a footnote on this. I think Bernie Sanders would like to be chairman of the budget committee after the midterms and understands what could happen if they don't get an agreement on Build Back Better and if they don't pass infrastructure. My footnote is that you have a group of people, especially in the House, people call them the squad. There are actually 90 members of the Progressive Caucus, but a lot of the people in the squad, a lot of the people in the Progressive Caucus have never been in the minority. They got elected in 2018. They don't know what it's like to be in the minority. So if this all comes apart, it will come apart for exactly the reason that you stated, that you have ideological purists who are going to say, I can't support any of this. This doesn't do enough, this bill. I think it won't happen, but I think it could happen. And if it could happen, and if it does happen, I think Democrats could be in for a very, very bad midterm.
I would say one is you asked a very, very good question, because this is the heart of the challenge now. I would kind of half disagree with my friend Bob about the Senate. It is coarser and more partisan now, but the Senate has a long history of having one or two members mansion style with parochial interests. You can go back to the Dixiecrats, the civil rights legislation, kind of gumming up the works. I mean, you got to remember when the founding fathers came up with this whole thing a zillion years ago, they're like, oh, we're going to have a House of Representatives. Great. And all the drunks in the tavern are going to elect other drunks, and they're going to be running the country, and they're all going to be cheap demagogues. What the hell do we do about it? Well, we have the Senate, and we also have federalism. State governments will be strong. The Senate, we're making it impossible to get elected to. You get appointed, and their job is to make sure the House doesn't go crazy. So, of course, we've democratized the Senate now, but they have a set of rules which are designed to give the minority some power, even if you don't have the majority. If you're a minority senator, you got a lot of power to screw stuff up. And they've kind of made an art out of that, almost to some would argue an obscene level. So the Senate is kind of like a steroid monster version of the original idea, even though they have much more direct election now, or they're elected by the populace rather than appointed by the elites. The interesting thing to me is the House, because the House used to have more party discipline in it. When you're a minority member in the House, you've got no power at all. I mean, it's a little different now simply because it's so close. We never have the House in American history this close. It's a huge oddity to have like a fewer than 7-seat majority. So it's kind of like Bob alluded to in the Senate now, where every senator's in charge. Well, any group of 3 House members can be in charge too. So the House is starting to act more like the Senate, and the squad, the Progressive Caucus, is very emboldened. Now, you can partially blame the Republicans for this one, because if you go to the average, not all, but the average Republican member of Congress who's been there for a while, and you ask them what they hate more than anything else, they'll say the Freedom Caucus, which was a group of about 25 very hardcore Republican conservatives who would vote as a bloc and screw everything up. That is new within a party. Generally, there's real pressure, and the Republicans are better at this. They do tend to march in a straight line, but the Freedom Caucus was the beginning of kind of this hostage taking. And the progressives looked at that and thought, hey, we like it. Now, what the progressives would say, if they're on the phone now, is, we pull a hard rope for the Democratic Party. Our districts are where all the Democratic voters are, and we never get what we want. We're always compromising and getting screwed. And the Republicans are probably going to win the midterms, which is a sad thing. For us in the Progressive Conference, it's not that big a thing because we're all from safe districts that a box of hammers could win if it had a D stenciled on it. So we feel bad about you moderates who won't be here in 2 years, but we're going to be here. But we're in majority now, and we're going to ram some stuff through while we still have time. And we're going to use those Freedom Caucus tactics of holding our breath if we don't get what we want. And that's what we're seeing right now. The latest hard pill to swallow is the $6 trillion Bernie budget in the Senate became the $3.5 trillion Bernie budget. And now Biden's going to make it the more realistic $1.9 billion budget. Will the House progressives take that, or will they revolt again? They tasted a little blood before. But it is odd. We saw it with a little bit with Obamacare. So this is not the first time it's happened in Democratic land. Hard to find it in Republican land. You know, maybe you could argue when George W. Bush wanted TARP to try to like hold up the world economy, and the Republicans bucked and the Democrats had to do it with limited Republican help. But it is hard to find many examples of Republican presidents in their vital first year getting shut down by their own party. I mean, Biden went up to the Hill during the first fight to try to back up Pelosi. He looked around and he thought, God, they don't have the votes for my, compromise instincts to get to a $2 trillion bill. So he had to put on a Mao cap and blend into the crowd and join the revolution. Now he's trying to put that toothpaste back in the cap, and it's hard. So this is a new development. Last thing I'd say, there used to be about 80 members of Congress on the ideological scale between the most liberal Republican, like a Bill Green coming from the Upper East Side of Manhattan, the old famous Silk Stocking District, and the most conservative Tory Democrat from the South. So there were about 80 members between most liberal Republican and most conservative Democrat. Now they're essentially zero, maybe one or two. And so that has taken away the room to maneuver. And it's made most of these cats who are in safe districts, there are only 30 districts that are really in play anymore. It used to be over 100. They only care about their primary politics. So the moderate Democrats know there's some AOC who's going to pop up through the floorboards saying no surrender, no compromise, damn it, and win a primary and then be totally ineffective. Name a piece of legislation AOC's had anything to do with. She represents social media. She can't get anything done, and there are a bunch more like her. But they're the threat now. So politics has become internal purity on both sides rather than maneuvering in a district that could go either way, where you got to be more pragmatic. And that with a little ignition by the tactics of the Freedom Caucus has expanded now into the Democratic Party, and it's a real vexing problem for Biden or the Democratic moderates who would like not to lose their seats next year and see the speaker's gavel passed to Steve Scalise or Kevin McCarthy or one of several other members who are eyeing it. And if you had to bet right now, bet on the Republicans winning the House. And, you can thank the progressives for helping.
Wow. All right, we've got about time for one more question. So who wants to pass the, one of those mics? There we go.
Hi, my name is Caitlin. My question kind of extends upon what you were both talking about in the previous question, especially with regard to the 2022 midterms. But especially with the infrastructure bill and the reconciliation bill being stalled in Washington right now, do you think it's more valuable for Biden to try to push through with the more progressive side of his agenda and appeal to the progressive voter base, or to keep attempting to compromise with moderates and Republicans to appeal to the part of his agenda that said he would try to reduce political polarization in government?
Mike, you want to go first?
Yeah, well, I would just say, and when my grading, I should have mentioned this. I give Biden an A, maybe an A+, for helping the Senate do something they haven't done in 20 years, which is pass a big piece of legislation in the current climate with over 60 votes, a true bipartisan piece of legislation, that infrastructure bill, which is a smart bill and it's great for the country. I have to say that Kirsten Sinema, who's now under full attack for not being on board the progressive train, was instrumental in those negotiations. So Biden deserves a lot of credit for that. I've been saying out loud, shouting from the rooftops in my pundit job for months that the Democrats should pass the infrastructure thing fast and get the huge political win. Then wheel around and have the big fight over how progressive is it, 2 trillion, 3 trillion, 3.5 trillion or whatever it is. But the progressives, they held the infrastructure bill hostage because they don't trust their own party to do that. Well, now they're getting the same thing. They're getting 1.9 and they've kind of sucked the wonderful infrastructure bill and the big political victory for the president into the vortex. So, Joe Manchin had the best line of all. It will not win him the cover of Progressive magazine, but he was cornered last week about, damn it. And he said, look, here's the message to my progressive friends. I'm from an overwhelmingly Republican state. I've never been a progressive. You want to pass big progressive bills? Elect more progressives. Win a few more elections. Don't ask me to be what I'm not. And he's totally right about that. So the smart move was infrastructure first, but the progressives won't go for that. So here we are. But as Bob says, they're going to get something. They have to, because the midterms will be a disaster. The thing to watch is the suburbs. That's where the Republicans have blown up. And that's what the Senate races are about. And Democrats winning the Senate is still definitely possible. But we got this race in Virginia next week or in 2 weeks, where the suburbs are heading back to the Republican, because the Democrats, their bases, the liberal part of the base is unhappy they don't have their Candyland. And the more moderate suburban Democratic vote is inching back to the Republicans because Republicans have nominated a candidate who's non-threatening. So that candidate, Glenn Youngkin, is getting all the Trump rural tribal voters who just hate Democrats, don't really love him, but he's better than a Democrat. And he's winning back to suburbs. If I had to bet today, I bet he's going to beat Terry McAuliffe in that governor's race. And then the media will go crazy. Oh, Biden dead, Democrats in disarray, end of the world. So if they want to head that off, pass the infrastructure bill tomorrow and then have the fight on the other.
I agree.
We're pushing on time. So if you.
Oh, sorry, I went long.
No, you're good, Mike.
I agree with almost all of that. I think that if Biden were doing this over again, they might come in with the big COVID relief package, which we forget was passed in the first days of the Biden administration, come in with the infrastructure bill, focus everybody's attention on the vaccines, trying to get people vaccinated. They've done that. And hope that with passing all of that stuff, the economy is going to be in good shape and they'd be in better shape after 2022. But that horse has left the barn. I think it would be a terrible mistake for Biden to say, look, it has to be 3.5 trillion. I don't care if I lose on this thing. We'll make it an issue in the midterm. First of all, people don't even know what's in it.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to tell people what's in it, which frankly, I don't think there's been a terrific job of doing that. So I'm where Mike is. I think they will come to an agreement. And I understand that one person in the Senate, 3 or 4 in the House could derail it. I think they will come to an agreement on Build Back Better. And I suspect that under the pressures they're facing right now, as long as they have an outline of what's in the reconciliation bill, they will go ahead and pass the infrastructure bill. But they won't, it should have been a big celebratory moment. Instead, it's become a mess and you got to do the celebrating afterwards. And as the Affordable Care Act showed us, if things become a big mess along the way in the sausage making of legislation, it's hard to have a celebratory moment. Then you sometimes have to wait for it 4, 5, or 6 years. And the Democrats can't afford to wait 4, 5, or 6 years.
Great comments.
I know we're out of time. Just very quickly, a commercial. Go into politics. It's easier than you think, and it's desperate for good people. The only hard job is the first one. Once you're inside, merit works. So I would encourage you never to be intimidated out of a career in public service or in elected politics or practical politics. It looks intimidating from the outside. It's the most porous thing in the world.
Thank you both so much. That was great.